So, welcome once again, and especially welcome to leaders and members of waste picker associations all over the world, present in the launching of the book entitled Contested Waste, Environmental Conflicts, and Waste Picker Resistance in the Global South. So, this book and this webinar are a celebration of more than 30 million people of the waste pickers all around the world. Their fights, resistance, and organization capacity. Also, we are valuing their contribution. And that is why this webinar is done in the framework of the International Waste Picker Days on March the 1st, remembering the facts that occurred against the Colombian waste pickers in 1992. That is why we can see here in the book some pictures of a demonstration of waste pickers in Colombia. So I'm going to talk about the three different parts that we have in this webinar. First of all, we are going to have a book presentation by the editors. Then we will have some interventions from three people that are invited to comment about the book. And then we will have the participation of the attendees. So you can leave your questions and comments in the chat. Next one. So I'm going to introduce the ones that are going to be presenting the book. So first of all, I'd like to start with
Daniele Vico.
Daniele Vico.
He is a PhD candidate in political ecology and ecological economics at the Faculty of Economics and Business of the University of Barcelona, Spain. His research deals with informal recycling in European and Global South cities with a focus on informality, racialization, labor exploitation, and conflicts. Before joining academia, he worked as a project officer in the ILO, International Labour Organization, focusing on trade union, labor protection, the just transition, and the social and solidarity economy. Then Lucía Fernández, which is a PhD candidate at the doctorate in architecture at the University of the Uruguay Republic, an assistant professor at the Institute of Urban Studies of the Faculty of Architecture, Design, and Urbanism. She was also an assistant professor at the Social Solidarity Economic Cooperative University. And when she was based in London, and he had a research affiliation at the Department of Urban Studies Planning at the MIT. Lucía holds an MA in architecture focused on spontaneous recycling dynamics from the École Nationale Supérieure d'Architecture, and an AMA on ethical and sustainable development for philosophy, faculty of the University of Lyon. Lucía has worked with waste picker organizations from around the world from the past 20 years. She was the waste picker global coordinator from WIEGO between 2007 and 2022. Then she became an acting general secretary for the International Alliance of Waste Pickers, where she steered the process towards the first elective Congress in May 2024. She stepped down from her role and was appointed as director of WIEGO's Organization and Representation Program. And finally,
So Federico Demaria is a political ecology professor at the University of Barcelona. He's an attendant professor in the University of Barcelona, and he has worked on economy relations, society and environmental relations, and he has focused specifically on environmental justice and ecological justice, and also alternatives for economic growth. He has founded Research and the Growth, and he has published papers on socio-ecological information, and he has worked with his teams and researchers, and he has led the development of environmental justice, that is a global platform that has registered different conflicts and that you will get to know in this space. So I'd like to give the floor to each of the editors that are going to be presenting today. Thank you so much, Federico. So this is a book that has been dedicated, as you have mentioned, It has been dedicated to all waste pickers who are still fighting to improve their working conditions and defend the right to work, because even today they are still, well, just fighting for their lives in the dump wells. Next ones. So they have also created a sustainability source for 34 million waste pickers. So these are some numbers that were released recently. And this role hasn't been recognized. So, well, different people and stakeholders have been mentioning Medina, for example, the ILO. But these waste pickers contribute with their work. They daily recycle the materials that are discarded by the society. And I'd like to invite you to read a publication that is about to be released where we have information, specific statistics about the positive impact of informal waste picking. As regards history and some context about this book, for those that believe that books are made rapidly, well, that was not the case. I mean, it's been 14 years ago that we started with this. I mean, we met in Pune, India. More than 40 cities out of the 5 continents met for the first time in a strategic seminar to better understand the threats, the challenges, but also the solutions found for an inclusive handling of waste in the different cities. At that time, in the same place, we started to identify that there were some power generators that were being created based on waste at that time. Well, they were using some China sources, and it was a threat to waste pickers. So there were some demonstrations that were created, different fights. For example, well, something that Demaria stated in his thesis. Also, we found some resistance cases, some hopeful cases in the Philippines where there was a strong alliance of waste pickers, environmental groups, and organized communities that were supported by the International Alliance Against Incineration that fought together and created public policies against the construction of big facilities that were contaminant. In the African continent, there was a collapse of the dump site outside of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in 2017, where more than 100 waste pickers died, and it was one of the most tragic events identified. So it was another conflict where the local residents blamed the power generation plant and made the local government responsible for the bad management of this case, but they didn't talk about the origin of the financial capitals for this entrepreneurship, in this case, Singapore, China, and Denmark. Next one. Now, well, closer to Latin America, my region in Dominican Republic, it has also been registered in some reports by Tania Espinosa and Federico, the moderator for today's session. There were violations of waste pickers' human rights with repression and even killing one of our brothers in one of the demonstrations fighting for access to work. This dump site was funded by American companies, North American companies, together with some Spanish corporations. And what happened to us during all of these years, I mean, more than 10 to 15 years, was that we found out that there were similar cases in all of the regions in the global south. So that was a motivation to publish that, to give visibility of what was going on, and also to denounce, to report what was happening.
So since we were seeing that there were so many similar cases around the world, we started to wonder actually what is driving these conflicts? Like, what are really the main drivers behind these conflicts? Because this is not just, you could say, okay, in one country, in one city, the municipal government is corrupt, and this is why we are having a conflict. But there must be some structural issue behind all of these if there are so many and so similar. And here really comes the research question of this book. What are the main drivers of conflicts and marginalization of informal waste pickers in global South cities? Next. And here what we discuss this in the book as the sort of a recycling paradox. On one hand, you have the waste pickers that contribute to circular economy. So their work has clearly environmental benefits. One could even speak of a sort of ecosystem services, no? And you would expect public authorities to actually support them. Moreover, also because waste pickers belong to the most marginalized social groups, and it's an opportunity for livelihood. Instead, what we were seeing is that new policies which were being put forward were further undermining their livelihood. So they were making the situation of someone who is already socially marginalized even more difficult. And these were quite common, were most often privatization and incineration. So in some way, we started to think of this as a sort of an environmentalism of the poor. I don't know if you have heard this idea by John Martinez Alieri. It is the idea that all around the world, not only in waste, but in all sorts of sectors, poor people fight to defend the environment. And the reason is not because of some sort of post-materialist value in the sense of, oh, they are rich people and therefore they can care about the environment, but because their livelihood, their life depends more directly on the ecosystems and on the environment. Therefore, whenever there is an activity like a mining company which is negatively affecting the environment, poor people react in defense of the environment to defend their livelihood. Next slide. And what you see here is that with this idea of the environmentalism of the poor, John Martinez Alier and other people have put together the Environmental Justice Atlas. This is the largest inventory of environmental conflicts in the world. You can check the interactive map on the website that is shown on the screen. Every dot on this map corresponds to a conflict, and we have documented more than 4,000 of them. So you can see there are different colors, and this refers to different sectors. As you can guess, the blue ones are for water, the black one are for oil and fossil fuels, the one for waste are brown, etc. So we decided to use the environmental justice Atlas as the methodology to systematically map and document the cases that we were seeing of conflicts involving waste pickers. If you click on the map in one of these dots, a tab will open and you will find the description of the environmental conflict, and then you will find other information like the actors involved, the impacts, what has been the result of this conflict, etc., etc. So what we did, you can go to the next slide, is focus on the conflicts involving waste pickers, and we ended up mapping more than 70 of them. You can see here there's a quite even geographical distribution in the global south. They are divided as they are in the book basically by continent. And who actually documented these conflicts? It was not only academics, it was also scientists, but also students, master and PhD students, activists, NGO staff, etc., etc. And what people would do to document these cases, it would be to search for information online, make sure to talk with the local activists, and write a description of this conflict. Then this information is actually checked by the moderator of the EJAtlas. And finally, if the sources and everything seems okay, it gets published on the website. This description, this documentation of the conflicts is at the core of the book that we are discussing today. You can go to the next slide. And basically, this is the book. The book is opened by a foreword by Nora Padilla, which is with us here today in the room. Is a very well-known activist, which first led waste pickers in Colombia, then in Latin America, and then worldwide. It was very important for us to have the voice of the waste pickers expressed by themselves. Of course, they have agency, so they can speak by themselves. Then we have an introduction, which actually tries to respond to our research question in explaining what are the main drivers behind these conflicts. And this is what the other editor, Daniele Vico, will explain in a minute. Then we have the chapters, which cover more than 40 countries and are written by a total of 50 authors. So you can imagine it's many people and a lot of knowledge and expertise. And these are divided by continents, by regions. So we have an introduction which introduces each region, written by one of the WIEGO representative in the region, which sort of maps the trends also which are specific to this region. But the idea behind the book is really that we see global trends, and this is the important thing. The book makes a statement, there are many conflicts, and they are similar, and therefore we should understand why they're there. Then we conclude the book with an afterword. Our book is more focused on understanding why these conflicts are taking place, not so much on the solution, but we make proposal in the last chapter on what each of the actors involved in these conflicts, NGO, municipal governments, private companies, waste pickers organization, etc., on which of these actors could actually do. Then we outline a research agenda. So given there is a lot already published out there on waste pickers, we have sort of documented this and reviewed this. This includes both articles and books, mainly in English, which have already covered a lot of topics. For instance, there are lots of ethnographies on waste pickers, which look into the health, living and working conditions of waste pickers, etc., etc. Our book is more looking into the new trends. So the contribution of our book is really into look into the conflicts and look at this global dimension. And last, we have an annotated bibliography in which we also review the existing literature, as I just explained. This is our book. You can find information online, and we will also share the book with you after the seminar via email. But I give the word to my co-editor, Daniele Vico, for explaining the theoretical framework behind this book and how we made sense of all these empirical cases. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Federico. Yes, in my part of the presentation, I will focus a bit more on the theory that is behind the book and also try to explain these general trends that Federico mentioned. So first of all, to investigate these conflicts, we decided to develop an approach based on two disciplines, which are ecological economics and political ecology. Ecological economics is a discipline that is quite fit for quantitative and material analysis. And we deployed it because it gave us the basis to understand the conflicts as something nested within a broader biophysical system where there are waste streams and waste flows that flow and evolve over time. On the other hand, political ecology is something that allowed us to understand the underlying dynamics of power and justice, and in this case also injustice, that shape this waste governance. And then finally, we deployed a Marxist lens to refine this political economic analysis, which allowed us to better describe how a capitalist economy deals with waste, especially through two Marxist concepts, which are the concept of commodification and the concept of capital accumulation. And in methodological terms, finally, to identify these general trends, we deployed a methodology based on qualitative and quantitative methods, for example, qualitative coding and network analysis. And we will spare you the details of the methodology here, but you can find them in the introduction of the book. And now in the next slide, I will present you, let's say, a summary of the main trends that we identified among the cases. So first of all, the first transnational trend that we identified in our analysis is a general increase in the quantity of waste in the cities mentioned in the cases. So many cases in the book mention a quantitative increase of the municipal discards, especially the non-organic one, that they have to deal with, to the point that many municipal waste management systems started since the early 2000s to struggle with managing the collection and the disposal of these discards. And in certain cases, they were increasingly unable to carry on this management. So this crisis of the management quickly becomes in many of the cases, a political crisis. And in the context of the current neoliberal globalization in which we live, the mainstream political response to this crisis that we can witness in many cases of the book is to resort to private, market-based, and often high-tech solutions for waste management. Therefore, what we observed is that many cities are pressured to give up the management to private corporations that are often also multinational corporations and sometimes Western corporations, and also to adopt new technologies for waste management. New technologies that are usually more profitable than recycling in itself, such as waste-to-energy technologies, aka incineration. So these corporations, when they are able to take over the waste management system, they end up enclosing and gating the waste streams, in particular at the accumulation point, which is the landfills, in order to have exclusive access to the materials. And this, of course, is something that undermines the livelihood of informal waste pickers that cannot access waste anymore. And this sparks persecution, marginalization, and ultimately, of course, conflicts. Finally, another general trend that we identified is increased pollution and contamination. This because the waste management crisis itself, coupled with the development of new, more polluting plants such as incineration, often increase the pollution and the contamination of water, land, and air. And this, first of all, often impacts more disproportionately communities that are already marginalized, such as waste pickers themselves, and further exacerbates conflicts. These global dynamics that I just described show quite clearly that waste over the last 20 years has become more contested and in general more conflictive. This, we believe, is coherent with a general tendency of the global capitalist economic regime, which is the tendency to commodify. What does this mean? As many of you already know, capitalism seeks opportunities to extract value and to accelerate capital accumulation. And today, waste represents a new opportunity for capital accumulation. Waste for centuries has been considered a discard, no? Something unwanted, something to get rid of. While today, it is increasingly seen as a source of profit, and therefore it is increasingly commodified for capital accumulation. And these capital accumulation trends happen through different means. First of all, and this book documents it very clearly, through dispossession, meaning the privatization of waste, the enclosure of waste, and the persecution of actors that are in competition with the private corporation, for example, the waste pickers, and also through contamination, which from a Marxist economics point of view is the simple shifting of environmental costs of the economic activities onto the shoulder of marginalized communities and onto the environment. And in the book, we call this regime the regime of waste capitalism. This was a bit of a theoretical and analytical presentation of the more analytical part of the book. And now I leave the floor again to Lucia for the conclusion.
Thank you, Daniele. Thank you, Fede. While we were producing the book, when cases were being systematized with the EJAtlas and the University of Barcelona, WIEGO, together with many organizations of West speakers, were building an international alliance for the recycling sector. We had a motto that we used to use, that is, if there are no borders for those who fight, then what is going to happen? And what Daniele is bringing about what is happening with capitalism around waste, we have these forces oppressing and removing the livelihood from recyclers. So these transnational efforts became a reality 2 years ago in the foundation or with the creation of the International Alliance of Waste Speakers. And here we have many pictures of that moment in the book. And considering how long the publication took, we were able to include also other pictures. Next slide, please. As also, we were able to include some annexes, especially the resolution on just transition for waste speakers and the constitution of the International Alliance of Waste Speakers. Of course, not the entire document, just part of them. But in the book, you will find a link to the website of the Alliance with this document. Next, please. And finally, in order to close this part and give the floor to the other speakers and for us to have some time for questions and answers, I would like to thank all of the people who participated in the development of this book, all the authors in the different chapters, as Federico mentioned, the regional interventions, Amira from Sierra Leone, Lakshmi from Pune. Thank you for your work from the different regions, Nora's forward that we are going to have her here soon, Pablo's maps that allowed us to give some clarity to what we were talking about. And also I would like to thank all of the people who supported us in this webinar, Kendra from WIEGO Canada, Maria Jose from Sweden, the interpreters, the slide design by UTEP Argentina, and of course, all the sisters from the waste speaker community that are here with us. Jyoti, Angie, all the brothers and sisters from Colombia that are here with us. Thank you to all of you. And now I'll give the floor to Federico for the next part of this webinar.
Thank you so much to the editors of the book. Once again, thanks everyone for being here. Thank you to our waste speakers, brothers and sisters in Colombia, Mexico, Senegal, India. I mean, a lot of countries that are together with us. So now we are going to give the floor to the invited commentators. So first of all, we will have Manisha, then we will have Casper, and then Nora. So I'm going to make a brief introduction of each of them.
First of all, Manisha and Natraman's interdisciplinary research explores inequality and ecological transitions through ethnographic and participatory methods. She has published 2 books connecting environmental justice, sustainability and development, Recycling Class, The Contradiction of Inclusion in Urban Sustainability, and she co-edited the volume of The Circular Economy and the Global South. She's currently an assistant professor of sociology at the Center of Sociology Disorganizations and associate fellow at Chapman House Environmental and Society Program. Then we jump into Casper Edmonds. He has, for more than 26 years, worked in the back group at the International Labour Organization. And he's currently working in the ILO Sectoral Policies Department, where he coordinates ILO support to governments, employers, and workers in addressing decent work opportunities and challenges in extractive energy and manufacturing. He's also coordinating the ILO work on circular economy. Prior to this assignment, he has worked on projects to combat child labor in Kathmandu, Nepal, and in the ILO's Department for Partnership and Development Cooperation in Geneva, Switzerland, where he helped to mobilize more than 500 million to ILO projects around the globe. He was furthermore detached to the secretariats in the International Labour Conference that support the negotiation and adoption on the ILO Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work in 2019 at the Global Call to Action for a Human-Centered Recovery from the COVID-19 crisis that is inclusive, sustainable, and resilient in 2021.
And now it is a pleasure to introduce Nora Padilla. So Nora is a waste picker leader recognized for her role in the organization and defense of waste pickers. And since her childhood, she has worked in recycling and waste picking in Bogota, and then she became a leader of the waste pickers movement, leading the Bogota Waste Pickers Association and the National Waste Pickers Association in Colombia. Because of her leadership, waste picking has been recognized as a very special part of the economy. This is very important. Thousands of waste pickers have been included in the policies because of her service. So in her recognition of her work in 2013, she received the Goldman Entrepreneur Prize, one of the most important international prizes. So she has also worked at an international level in the waste pickers section, being part of the Caribbean Waste Pickers Network and also the International Alliance of Waste Pickers. Now I'd like to give the floor to Manisha.
Thank you very much. I'll speak today in English. First of all, I want to express that I'm deeply honored to be asked to comment on this book, especially because there are so many people here, both participating in this webinar, listening to it, who have an incredible amount of knowledge and expertise on everything that this book talks about in terms of their practice, in terms of their activism, and in terms of their academic work. So I'm very honored to be amongst such a wonderful group of people here. And my reactions are really in terms of kind of what I took from this book and how I think it can be an important guide for academic work on the issue of waste, livelihoods, and a more just and ecologically sound future. So first, I'm going to highlight 3 elements of the book that I find really important. First, the way in which the book has been produced and written. 2, what that process, what insights come out of that process that I find new and important in terms of how we understand waste conflicts, and how waste conflicts in turn are connected to a broader set of conflicts to do with the question of a decent life in a sustainable and safe planet. And then finally, some of the kind of new elements and new agendas of research that the book highlights, especially at the end. So first, like Lucía said, I think 14 years is a perfectly good time to write a book, because what you do when you take 14 years to write a book is you write a book that is collaborative, that is collective, that identifies the knowledge produced not simply by people within universities or sanctioned spaces of knowledge production, but the knowledge that is gained through everyday practice, through struggle. And I think that what we really see in this book is this collective voice. You see a collective voice that has been generated through the careful collection and curation of cases from many different parts of the world, but also then through the regional introduction, putting those in conversation with each other to identify themes that stand out and reveal how we can actually understand something more general, not by assuming generality, which often something that scholarship, particularly that comes out of the West, tends to do. We study one context, we make theory, and then we assume that's happening everywhere. But rather, this book does something exactly opposite. It pays attention to lots of different situated experiences. It highlights knowledge that is produced in diverse contexts, and then it looks to stitch those experiences together to understand what we can identify through that collective inquiry. And in the process, it produces something that is methodologically rigorous, relevant for academic scholarship, but also has value for practitioners, policymakers, and actors on the ground. And I think that it really kind of helps us go beyond a lot of the single case elements that we have to really understand what some of the common global patterns are. And the second, I think, thing that also this process does is it also helps show that there are tensions that are operating at multiple levels. And I think the book really, does justice to the complexity of the issue by staying with those tensions and those ambivalences, and not simply, writing them out of the story, and thereby really painting a very complex and rich picture. So what does this type of collective comparative analysis give us? And here I want to kind of identify three key things that I really took away reading the book and the different elements of it, right? So first, the book, by thinking about material changes and political economy together, it really helps us push back against two very common tropes when it comes to the problem of waste. The first trope is that it's a local problem, that the reason why there are waste distribution conflicts or ecological conflicts around waste is because of as Federico mentioned, a corrupt officials, bad consumer behavior, workers who are inefficient. We know these stories. These are the stories that are used to limit how the problem of waste is problematized and then addressed. But instead, by showing how material changes and political economic shifts go together, this book really pushes back against this localizing of the problem by tracing the broader structural issues of the political economy that are involved in both producing the problem as well as addressing it in ways that in many cases does not address the ecological problem while producing new social issues at the same time. I particularly found it really, compelling how as you say, the material quality of the waste has changed in many global south cities. There are more plastic materials. There is more construction and debris. But again, it's waste pickers' work that help us see that not all of those materials are recyclable. Some of them are, and waste pickers are already involved in taking care of them. But the rest that is being put out there is not the responsibility of consumers, and nor is it the responsibility of waste pickers. So it helps us think about what drives, for example, the production of large quantities of construction waste in large cities. How is that tied to financial capital that looks for opportunities to develop and destroy, and through that process continue to maintain those chains of accumulation that Daniele was talking about? So I think this multi-scalar analysis is a really important contribution of the book. And I think it also shows us how in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, we see these similar themes emerge, even though the specific dimensions of the conflicts might be different from place to place. The second element that I think is very interesting in the book is how it shows us that across all of these contexts, there is this really interesting move. While on the one hand, the labor of waste pickers is essential to the functioning of urban infrastructures. In several cases, all the way from the Zabaleen in Cairo to case studies in Africa and Asia, we see how in the absence of waste pickers, there would be even more of an ecological and a public health crisis than these cities might already be witnessing. But yet, somehow their work is framed in many contexts as somewhat criminal, unnecessary in the way. So this move of rendering something essential disposal, but yet disposable, by devaluing the essential work of waste pickers is something we see across multiple cases. And what we then see is that it is this act of devaluation that justifies privatization, that justifies bringing in technology. So I think what the book really shows is how we see this consistent theme of the ways in which public policy actors, private capital, global development organizations set up certain narratives about this work so as to then justify bringing in a different set of actors or a different set of technologies. But at the same time, there are also very interesting cases to show how this is being resisted. So for example, the ways in which waste picker organizations are themselves collecting data and using data as a way to say, no, actually, we are collecting, we know what we are collecting, we know what is recyclable, we know what is not recyclable. We have an understanding, a privileged view on this whole ecosystem as a consequence of our labor. So I think this is a very important epistemological intervention by saying that waste pickers and waste workers have specific ways of understanding the system, understanding the problem that other actors do not have access to. And I think I'll conclude with this last point. I think this is extremely important in the current moment. And in page 33, I'm going to read out a sentence from the book here. This is the introduction to the regional introduction to Africa written by Amira El-Halabi. She writes, one might assume that waste pickers, who have long been the pillar of all recycling activities on the continent, would be ideal candidates to drive the sector forward. Yet unaccountably, there is an abundance of young entrepreneurs and private capital backed by international donor funds ready to capture new pools of accumulation that notably were originally created by informal recyclers. And indeed, in my own work in India and elsewhere, I've seen this trend where as waste now becomes something that is seen as a frontier of value, that there are a range of new actors funded sometimes by venture capital firms, by international donor organizations coming in to try and capture this market. In many cases, this results in the absolute dispossession of waste picker access to waste. In other cases, there are attempts to try and include and integrate waste pickers into these emerging agendas. But I think today there is a really important agenda for research and action to understand how these initiatives are evolving and to make sure that the principles of a just transition that are articulated at the end of this book are also put in place to ensure that this new framework of the circular economy does not become another. After incineration, it's the circular economy that once again reproduces the very same dynamics of enclosure, dispossession, and marginalization that has otherwise been very thoroughly documented in this book. So with that, I'll stop and thank you again very much for the opportunity to share some thoughts on this important work.
Thank you so much, Manisha. And now I would like to give the floor to Casper.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are on this beautiful planet of ours. My name is Casper Edmonds, and I work for the International Labour Organization. For those who do not know the ILO, we are the UN specialized agency that deals with labor issues. We believe that everyone everywhere should have the right to a job in freedom, in security, in dignity. I'm extremely pleased to be here today in such a fantastic audience and among such knowledgeable expert speakers and panelists. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for thinking of the ILO in this regard. I'm humbled by the real wealth of real case stories, of real people's work that you have brought to life in this book. I applaud you for it. It is, for me, a milestone in the research of waste pickers and recycling workers around the world. This will from now on be the benchmark that we will all look to in our work to depict the conditions in which waste pickers and recycling workers live and work. You have all my admiration and my heartfelt congratulations on the launch of this book. I'm here today to explain not how we in the ILO see the issues, but how we in the ILO are trying to support your work in fighting for the rights of waste workers and recycling workers all around the world. Our efforts began years ago with work on the important role that cooperatives and social and solidarity economy entities can play in terms of organizing, empowering workers in waste, in recycling, and give them voice. And it's great to see in the book many examples of the important role, extremely important role, that these organizations, cooperatives, and other social and solidarity economy entities continue to play. Very recently, only last year, we stepped up our work on waste management and recycling. And we launched a technical brief on decent work in recycling, which was written by my dear colleague, Lena Chiaravelli. This book was written as an input for the first ILO official meeting that took place last year, where participants from governments from our 187 member states, participants from workers' organizations and organizations of waste pickers and informal economy workers, including the International Alliance of Waste Pickers and WIEGO and SEWA and others, but also organizations of employers took part. It was the first time in the history of the ILO that these three key actors have come together, those that make waste and recycling work, come together to discuss the way forward. And what we adopted, and what I'm proud to share with you here today, was the first ILO policy guidelines for the promotion of decent work in recycling. For those of you who were there with us in that room, it was a week of extremely intense negotiations, which culminated at 1 o'clock in the morning of the Saturday. The reason why it was so challenging was that there were real issues at stake. I urge you all to consult the policy guidelines for the promotion of decent work in recycling, because there you will find the recognition that every worker in the sector of waste and recycling has the right to enjoy the fundamental principles and rights at work. That means every worker enjoys the right to freedom of association, to join organizations of their choosing, to bargain for better working conditions, incomes, wages, to advocate for formalization, the right to a safe and healthy working environment, all the things that matters for those who care for our planet, their communities, by every day working with waste and eking an income out of recycling. The policy guidelines also are reflections of, as I mentioned before, the important role that cooperatives and social and solidarity economy entities continue to play in advocating and advancing rights of waste and recycling workers, and advancing their working conditions, their incomes, and the recognition for the important work that they do. There's also guidance in the book about how sustainable enterprises can contribute to the issue. And finally, the whole exercise and the policy guidelines highlight how important it is that everybody who work with waste and recycling should have a voice when it comes to designing the systems and infrastructure that are needed to better handle, manage the waste that we continue to generate on this planet. These policy guidelines are available in English, French, and Spanish, and we soon hope to translate them into Arabic and into Hindi. We in the ILO stand ready to help you implement them in practice. They are specifically written as bullet point guidance and recommendations, advice and assistance to governments, to waste workers, to employers, to social and solidarity economy entities, cooperatives, to investors, to everyone who shape the world of waste and recycling. This very important guidelines is only a part of the work we do in the ILO to promote a just transition to the circular economy. Also last year, we published for the first time the most authoritative and reliable estimates of how many people worldwide work in recycling, but also in the broader circular economy. And our estimates, very conservative estimates, show that between 121 and 141 million people derive a job or an income from the circular economy. This figure is probably way too low because we are not yet fully capturing in our official statistics and research all those who in the informal economy are advancing circularity. We hope to better capture that, particularly in agriculture, when we this year at the World Circular Economy Forum in India will launch an updated estimate of how many people work worldwide in the circular economy. In this and many other efforts, we will continue to count on everybody's support to bring about better knowledge, but also in implementing what we have now agreed are ways forward for better working conditions, higher incomes and wages, and opportunities for everyone to enjoy their rights in waste and in recycling. I think I speak for everyone who was in the room where these policy guidelines on promoting these work in recycling was adopted, that we are fed up with the lack of progress, that we want to see better conditions and improved livelihoods for everyone who care for our planet and for our communities with the work that they do every day for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Casper, for your intervention. And I am going to share now that the International Waste Speaker Alliance participated in the creation of those guidelines, and also they are taking the final text that was approved last year in December, and they are trying to turn it into a tool that can reach every recycler. So whatever translations you might have, they're going to be very useful. Now I'm going to give the floor to Nora Padilla, our last speaker for today. Thank you, Fede. Thank you, Lucia, Federico. And I would like to thank everyone who made this meeting possible. And especially, I would like to thank those of you who developed this book. This book is very important. The stories of recyclers, landfills, and recycling. I mean, I have thousands of stories. And if we wanted to romanticize the situation of workers, we could do it. However, this book presents us with important elements that, from my perspective, turn this book into a very important tool, especially for recyclers or waste pickers. And why is this so important for us? Because this shows the conflict that we've been having for more than 40 years against a system that has been excluding us more and more. Also, they're putting us into slavery because of the prices of materials, also excluding us and not acknowledging all the services that we provide for the environment and for cities. And also, they are not giving importance to the work that we do for societies. However, when they privatize public services, not only in terms of waste, but also public utilities such as gas, water, telephone, and all the utilities that humanity needs for its development, we know that by privatizing utilities and public services, society authorized corporations to define new schemes of slavery, predation, and abuse. They already had very profitable processes, such as the sale and purchase of the materials that becomes raw material for elements of mass usage, that was extremely high. And after privatizing waste, that abuse became deeper. So this book gathers in a very good way the main threats, because we as waste speakers suffer from so many threats, environmental threats. For example, right now in Colombia, our brothers and sisters in the North Shore have lost their houses and also all of their materials in warehouses, and they cannot work because there was an overflow of dams and because there was a cold front in the North Shore. And this really affected the work of waste pickers. So these are not just environmental threats. Also, as you explained at the beginning, we've suffered from social crimes. The forced disappearance of waste pickers. At the beginning, it was just dealing with those who were taking the material, but then they were coming against us, those of us who were organizing in order to fight against the different corporation and social ways of exclusion and social ways of the forced disappearance of recyclers. In 1992, when there was a research in the University of Barranquilla showing how many people had died or had been forcibly disappeared, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights showed that there were hundreds of waste pickers that were being kidnapped or killed just because they were out there picking up recyclables. So we were here explaining that we were having a threat, but also a dispute because of the material, because this material can be found within the framework of public utilities, and therefore corporations, which are a very important economic branch here, they want to take for themselves the recycled materials. And this is why we have so many open landfills. For example, in Central America, our brothers and sisters are suffering because they're being threatened. They are turning landfills on fire because they want to expel them. Or in India, with the lack of support from the state, our sisters are suffering from a lot of pressure, not only environmental pressures, but also uh, given the complexity of the mixture of waste. So as waste speakers we are making amazing contributions to the planet. However, the society is not supporting us and including us. What we actually see is that we are being threatened permanently, especially when we try to organize.
So when there are organization processes, we have some vulnerability elements because we don't even have the right to organize ourselves. When we are individualized, we are easy targets of everything. Business policies, governmental policies, and the society as well. But these organizational processes have been called by us the association economy. This is a term that is not very well known because people talk about ecology economy and ecology politics and capital economy. People talk about SSE economy, but they don't talk about this type of economy. So making it visible helps waste pickers and also many other sectors, such as indigenous people, peasants, and different communities, which are not populations that are vulnerable per se, but rather because they are vulnerable workers. We create richness for humanity, for companies, for businesses, for our families. And well, for our families, we also there is also poverty, even though we do this work. So we have used this type of economy as a tool to reject all of these threats and to carry out this dispute, which is a dispute for waste that will go to different management systems. So for waste pickers, this book is a very important tool, and I would like to promote this book and I would like to recommend it to other waste pickers. The book is still in English, but let's try to get a look at it, to get into its content and to make it a tool, because we know that the threats are being deepened. There is more government abuse, more authorities abuse, and even though there are some instructions to protect workers, for example, there are some ILO measures that have been released. These measures are not applied in the different countries. I mean, these are measures to protect our work, because this is a work that contributes to mitigation of waste management. So in all of the treaties, the idea is for corporations to replace waste pickers in the management of recycling waste. So as you've seen in many publications, in more than 100 years of work in India, Latin America, we are trying to fight for this. We know that we are undergoing a global crisis, and also in Europe, thousands of waste pickers are suffering this situation in the US, in Canada, in those countries where we thought that waste pickers would not be living in poverty. They are living in poverty. So we are reaching out to them as well, and we see that we are sharing the same problems. So first of all, I would like to thank this space. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my reflections. Also, I would like to, well, try to motivate you to have a second publication to kind of go deeper in the threats. And also, I think that this book will be helpful not only for waste pickers, but also for different parties that interact with waste pickers. And it will be great to try to kind of distribute this knowledge. I mean, we need technical publications, we need report publications, I mean, different types of publications in which we can share the knowledge that we have gathered in more than 100 years being waste pickers. So knowledge about waste management, public services management, and also I would like to congratulate you for this study. I mean, the only way to face threats and to win this dispute is with organization. We believe that organization is the means that will have enabled us to position ourselves in entities such as the ILO, and because of that, we have been able to participate in the climate summit negotiations, and also to talk about circular economy. We know that these are euphemisms because they do not always include or relate workers in the way that we think they should be included. And in the case of Colombia, since 1990, with the creation of the organization, we are committed to generating better life conditions for waste pickers. We know that it's not an easy task. This is a scheme that we are targeting at, but many actors want us to be outside this management. I mean, they would like waste pickers not to be that much included in this type of management, and they want us to be highly vulnerable so that they can generate cheap labor. And that is why the organization has to continue being our place to fight. And the advancement in technology to better manage recyclable material has to be considered as well. We have to try to make the most in each of the countries, because we are an alternative to mitigate landfill and to reduce landfill. And in case there are incineration systems installed in each of the countries, well, if we don't deliver the material, they will not have material. So I would just like to motivate brothers, sisters to continue fighting, and I would like to thank WIEGO and the consultants that have made this publication possible. And please, let's try to turn this type of tools into something really useful for advocacy management. So for all of us that are part of the International Alliance, let's try to work on it nationally, but also at an international level in different parts of the world where policies about waste management are defined. I mean, these policies should not only be about that, but also fully recognizing waste pickers. Thank you so much, Nora, for this very important intervention. Thank you so much to all of you. And I would like to tell you that the book, well, the idea of the book is to try to have it translated into different languages. The book is a kind of tree. It has different branches that relate to the different studies that were included in the atlas and many concrete cases as well. So, I mean, this is a kind of complementary response to some of the questions that have been posted. I mean, you can find the sources that enabled us to document the book. I mean, there are links, there are references in each of the chapters. And, well, most of the book makes reference to those documents that have already been published in different languages. And with that, dear readers, you will be able to find the experiences that talk about denouncement, but also resistance or counter proposals, as being mentioned before. So it's really important to have that into account. And something else that I would like to say is that, well, we are facing a great paradox that has been mentioned by Lucia, Federico, Daniele. And as Nora was saying, during a lot of time, waste pickers were made invisible. Then waste pickers were useful as long as they provided raw material that was really cheap in the value chain. And now that waste is a kind of, new goods for new markets, waste pickers are considered a problem, an obstacle. And so this is a scenario in which there is a waste dispute situation. I mean, when we talk about commodity or goods. So this is something that is going to create much more pressure. And that is why it's really important to get to know in depth these new pressures and these new markets that have names such as producer extended responsibility or producer shared responsibility or business responsibility. And while some of them are even part of the circular economy. We have different questions that have been posted, and well, I'm going to read them and give the floor to any of you to respond these questions. So first of all, well, we have some questions in the chat, and then we have some people that have raised their hand. So one of the questions is related to positive experiences associated to this organization actions, these actions related to integration and recognition of waste pickers. So the question says, are there action recommendations at grassroots level for waste picker organizations based on the book findings? And it also talks about successful cases in which waste pickers and their organizations are provided with urban services that could be used as examples. And finally, we have a very interesting question related to how organizations, among them unions, have contributed to solving these conflicts related to waste management, and whether it is possible to know if there are models for those that have been recently organized. So these are the three questions that I would like to share with you. And there are some other questions as well in the chat, but we'll address them later. And also there is somebody that is raising their hand. So who would like to address any of these questions? And the editors of the book can also participate if you want. Well, I can break the ice. Some of these questions are very specific and very complex, and some of them are not addressed in the book. But there is a correlation, I would dare to say, a very important correlation between the level of grassroots organization, which is what Nora was mentioning, and what is positive about inclusion or, well, favorable cases regarding livelihood. Well, we have Muna, Bogota, Argentina, South Africa, Senegal, places where there is a big organization and there is a trend to achieve some inclusion mechanisms that are more favorable. Because if they are alone, they lack more protections. I mean, this is not new. And what is shown in the book, which is quite interesting, I have mentioned this before, is the need to articulate not only the union world, and I think that we have a delegate from Africa that is making this question. I mean, the importance of the union as an organizational mechanism, and that, well, waste pickers are also considered workers. But also, when we talk about environmental organizations, local communities that defend and are concerned about the community health, I mean, what Fernanda does in Ecuador, which is really nice, I believe that the combination, I mean, it's not only waste pickers, but also some other people accompanying the process of dispute, not only for waste, but also, I mean, not only to say that the waste should belong to waste pickers, but also fighting for healthy cities. That is something that should include everyone. And we do have some examples. I have slightly mentioned this before, but we do have some examples in the Philippines and some other cases where we can see that this multiple intervention of actors in the fight, not only for material access, but also about how we manage cities, can have profiles where, I mean, environmental actors have a role. And I believe that, well, that is how I'm trying to answer to two of these questions.
Thank you, Lucia. Would you like to answer? Yeah, Nora. Okay, please go ahead. Yeah, I believe that nature is giving us back the poor management that we've been doing. I believe that from waste picker organizations, environmental organizations, and all the organized groups in society should get together in order to pressure or push for change in waste management and also a change in the creation of packages for packages that are highly contaminant to no longer be produced, especially those who pollute waters. I believe that humanity needs to change its mindset with regards to the production of waste, considering the poor management of waste, not only considering the impacts of climate change, but also considering the other elements that are highly pollutant of which we are responsible. So what I'm trying to say here is the following. We need to find a way to take this discussion to other scenarios as well. Thank you, Nora. Casper, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me here. Allow me to give just one good practice example of how trade unions have gotten involved in the fight for better working conditions and rights for recycling workers. And that is on the beach of Alang in India, just a few hundred kilometers north of Mumbai, one of the cities that has the highest concentration of billionaires in the world. on that beach, they are breaking the ships that have sailed the seas for 35 or 40 years in sometimes extreme heat or humidity. And this is a big business. Some 25 years ago, the Port Workers Union in Mumbai sent a delegation to that beach and started organizing formerly informal workers that were breaking the ships. And today, a new union has been created with more than 17,000 shipbreaking workers as members, even though they are, many of them, temporary workers for just 9 months at a time. And they have been able to advocate for better safety and health protection. They have provided inputs for a new ship recycling act that recognizes workers' organization. And they have started to bargain collectively for better wages and working conditions. There is still a long, long way to go, but it is in many ways a success story of what happens when, as Nora says, we all get together, waste pickers organizations, trade unions, environmental groups, then we can start to see a real change. It's also a stark reminder on that beach that recycling is not automatically environmentally sustainable or inherently socially just. Some of the ship recycling operations are polluting the environment, the beach, the water, and some of the working conditions remain very poor, where inequalities are recycled rather than broken. But it's one of the cases I'm aware of where most progress has been made, and it gives me hope that we can see such progress in other jurisdictions, in other communities of this world.
Thank you so much, Casper, for this intervention. And now I am going to give the floor to a different participant. Kendra, can you please help me? I think that the question is in the chat, but still, let me say the following. We have a very important and challenging question that could go for any of you, which is the following. If you had to give a summarized message of the book for decision makers, policy makers, what is it that public policy makers should understand about waste picker and their organizations before dealing with the design of urban waste systems? Do you want me to repeat the question?
If you want, I can take this one, Federico. I think the central message is a bit along the lines of what Manisha said before, no? That it is important that people understand that waste pickers are doing a fundamental contribution to societies. They contribute to the waste management by taking care of large part of it. They help citizens to manage their waste. There are environmental benefits because they foster recycling, etc. And it's not that we are speculating, it's that waste pickers are already there. No, sometimes we speak of the integration of waste pickers. Well, waste pickers are already part of the waste management system. They are already integrated into it, but this needs to be recognized. I think this is the core message. And if authorities act as if waste pickers didn't exist, then you have conflicts because they're there. And because if you dispossess them, then they will react. Of course they will react because on their livelihood, all this depends. I think one central message also of the book is that all of this, we are not talking about waste, we are talking about power. This is what we are talking about, and about injustices, no? So here, as Casper was saying, we can see a sort of an alliance among waste pickers, which do the most of it, also in terms of political terms, no? In terms of organizing, and then with some support, humble, by social and environmental activists, by scientists, by the ILO, etc. But there is an opponent on the other side. we like it or not, which is basically related, in my understanding, to capital, or if you want to simplify, to money. So this is a struggle. It's a global struggle which takes place not only in waste, but also in other sector. And the waste pickers are fighting this fight, and they've been doing it for a while, and we are trying to give some support to them. That's all from my side. Thanks.
Thank you, Fede. Now I'll give the floor to Lucia. Yeah, I just want to add an important detail because you were talking about public policies. We need to know that when there is a company that is going to come and try to sell you a solution, the truth is that they are just trying to generate their own business. This is the capital accumulation that we are referring to. It's not that this is a Chinese environmentalist telling you, oh, no, this is what we have to do. No, what we have there is a business that will give them a lot of money. So we need to understand that political definitions need to consider what we do have already and to improve what we already have and to try and avoid this temptation, because sometimes when you are in government, I have not been in government, but sometimes I do see that people feel like, oh, I need someone to come and help me with this. So they bring someone along in a suit, selling them a new project, and that would create a new set of problems and debts. So the book shows is that they actually do not work because they are not localized, because they do not grasp the context, because waste is different, because the municipal situation is very different. So we see there is in almost every case where we have an outsider coming to the global south, bringing great solutions, quote unquote. They end up not being positive, not only for waste speakers, but also for any citizen paying taxes. I wanted to put this on the table as well. Thank you, Lucia. Casper, go ahead, please.
One message from the ILO since we were founded is that labor is not a commodity. Waste is extremely valuable. That's why there's a fight over this value. But labor is not and can never be a commodity. We're talking about human beings who have a right to organize, a right to a safe and healthy working environment. This is the foundation for everything. And that is what we all have to fight for to avoid more dreadful conflicts and to allow the waste workers, the waste pickers, the recycling workers who care for our planet to do their job in better conditions, as I said before, of dignity, security, and safety.
Thank you very much, Casper. Manisha, you have the floor before answering Mauricio Lopez's question.
Yeah, I just will say this very quickly. I wanted to go back to a point that Nora made in response to this question, which is also about the need to consider the upstream. The reason, and there's another question in the chat about waste as commons, right? So it's true that waste has value, but waste is also toxicity. Waste also has elements in it that are dangerous, and particularly dangerous to the health of those who work with it. And I think the important element here about the work of waste pickers as well as the organization of waste pickers and their intervention in arenas where decisions around waste are being made is that they point out all of these different elements because through work with waste, you experience all of these different elements. And I think this is really important because it helps us realize that some of these are upstream issues. And the reason why we end up with toxicity downstream could be because it's cheaper upstream to have a particular production process or a particular material. So I feel like the other important element that I wanted to amplify is pushing kind of the attention also upstream in terms of the challenge of waste.
Thank you so much. We are about to close. Mauricio, Lucia invited you to meet with her, and you will find that the book includes a chapter about Uruguay and the case of Uruguay, Cruz Pato, and all the leaders were able to meet with the rapporteur from the ESCR group, and the situation is already being handled. It's 11:29 in Argentina and Brazil's time. And before closing, I would like to pay tribute to everyone who participated in the creation of this book. This book is a bridge, is a platform, and it is very important for us to see it as a moving element, because even though we have published it, this is a living organism that will keep on helping us to have a complete perspective, not only for the academic sector. The idea is for us to have this book in many languages, but as Nora said, this is going to be an instrument to read the local situation linked with this waste capitalism. And as Casper said, it is important for us to fight and defend the waste pickers that are part of this sector. Moreover, I would like to say that we are going to be in touch. I know that Federico, Lucia, and Daniele have been working a lot in order to facilitate the access to the book. And through the organizational structures that go from the global, the International Waste Picker Alliance, up to regional and national movements, and we have many of them in this meeting today. So it is very important that we can send all this information to every waste picker around the planet, because they are managing their own reality. So thank you all very much. And I would like to thank the interpreters as well. I would like to thank the organizers, and hugs to everyone. Have a good day. Bye. Thank you. A good way to celebrate March 1st.